And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is April the 17th, the 107th day of this new year. Just 258 days remain to the year's over with, and we'll go start a new one. Holidays and observances. World Hemophilia Day. Over 400,000 people. Paper cuts, nicks, and scrapes can actually be dangerous or even life-threatening. International Haiku Poetry Day. National Ford Mustang Day. No Limits for Deaf Children Day. And Herbalist Day. Now, there's a long laundry list of days being celebrated on this April 17th, but we're not going to go into a lot of them. Some of them you've never heard of, and some of them are very, very familiar. Well, the GOP has blocked President Trump's backed surveillance bill, setting up an end-of-the-month clash. The House has punted Trump's spy powers extension after conservatives blocked the deal. President Trump's push to extend the government's controversial warrantless surveillance powers suffered a minor setback this morning after a group of conservative lawmakers rejected a compromise deal that would have extended the program for 5 more years while incorporating some minor reforms intended to appease GOP privacy hawks. Just before 2 a.m. on this Friday, House Representatives approved a 2-week extension of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that's FISA, giving lawmakers till April 30th to reach a deal. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, voiced confidence his conference can come up with an agreement by the end of the month. He said, "We're very close tonight. There's some nuances with the language, some questions need to be answered, and we'll get it done." The extension allows us time to get that done. Well, Democrats have made it clear. If Trump is for it, they're against it. Logic doesn't enter into the conversation. Well, some interesting things have come to light. Some long-hidden documents have seen the light of day. And they reveal first Trump impeachment was a total fraud. Newly declassified documents proved that the first impeachment of President Trump in 2019 and 2020 was a carefully orchestrated fraud, all concocted by Trump-hating deep state actors within the intelligence community. They secretly conspired with Democrats in Congress to remove Trump from office and subvert the will of the American people that put him there. The damning evidence was produced Monday, April 13th, by Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. On Wednesday, she sent criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, aimed at 2 of the central figures who propelled the impeachment proceedings, accusing them of manufacturing a conspiracy. The first one was Michael Atkinson, who served as the Inspector General of the intelligence community at the time of the impeachment hearings. And the other was the whistleblower who filed a formal complaint about Trump's July 2019 telephone call with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. The identity of the whistleblower, CIA analyst and registered Democrat, still not been officially disclosed, which is utterly absurd at this point. He's not entitled to hide in the shadows of anonymity. By law, only the IG can decline to release his name. This applies to no one else. Gabbard should identify him, particularly since he no longer works in intelligence. A lot of folks had said the impeachment was made up, but until now, nobody really had the definitive proof. Well, travelers are going to be slapped with A number of ridiculous new fees as a popular city seeks to make millions per year. Many popular destinations struggling with over-tourism and infrastructure issues are aiming to fix those problems in an often unpopular way by enacting new taxes on tourists. City of Galway on the west side of Ireland, widely known for its medieval streets, colorful shop fronts, and historical landmarks, it's now considering a tourist tax that would generate more than $2.1 million annually in the city. That's according to the Tribune newspaper. The proposal envisions an accommodation charge of $1.10 to $2.20 per visitor per night for visitors staying in hotels or short-term lodging. St. Anne O'Brien, Galloway City Council's new tourism officer, spoke at a meeting this week to address concerns, according to the Tribune. She said most European countries already charge visitors a small nightly fee, with 21 of the 27 EU member states imposing similar taxes. She noted that a lot of international visitors come from Europe and are used to paying a tax, according to the Irish Independent newspaper. Any tourism levy would require legislation and approval from the Irish government at the national level. And that's good news for opponents to the proposal. At least 3 prominent local leaders have voiced their concern. Well, part of the problem is, as the fees go up, at a certain point, the number of tourists go down. We're seeing some of that, frankly, in Las Vegas right now. Well, Starmer and Macron are accused of playing at being relevant with the Strait of Hormuz plan. As British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron convene a summit Friday on the future of the Strait of Hormuz, the two leaders are pushing a European-led plan to reopen the shipping lane after the war without U.S. leadership. The British didn't want to help, but now they want to be the big shots and run everything. This proposal envisions a post-conflict naval mission made up of Britain, France, and other non-belligerent countries that would deploy only after the fighting ends. Unlike President Trump's current strategy of blockading Iranian ports with U.S. naval power, the Anglo-French initiative is intended to be separate from the warring parties and focus on restoring commercial shipping. Well, the theory's good. The way it gets carried out leaves a lot to be desired. Well, Bernie Sanders, AOC-backed Democrat, has won a key House race. GOP fails to expand its fragile majority. Republicans fell short in their bid to flip a vacant U.S. House seat in a blue-leaning district in northern New Jersey. Democrat Annalila Mejia, who was backed by progressive champion Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Representative AOC of neighboring New York, convincingly defeated GOP candidate Joe Hathaway in Thursday's special election in New Jersey's 11th Congressional District. Associated Press reported that victory. The race was called minutes after the polls closed at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. With her victory, Mejia will fill the final 8 months of the term of Governor Mickey Sherrill, the Democratic representative who stepped down from Congress in November after winning New Jersey's gubernatorial election. That special election came as the GOP clings to a fragile House majority. Republicans would have relished the opportunity to pick up the seat, but they faced a steep uphill climb to flip the suburban district. Sherrill won by 15 points in her 2024 re-election and carried by roughly that same margin in last year's gubernatorial election. Well, next teacher faces 25 charges, including rape and abuse, as an investigation widens. Former 5th grade teacher in Louisiana was arrested on multiple charges, including those involving her minor students. Marissa Noel, 31, faces a total of 25 charges, according to the St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Office, including 10 counts of indecent behavior with juveniles, 1 count of first-degree rape, and 2 counts related to child sexual abuse material, 1 count of unlawful communication, and 3 counts of computer-aided solicitation of a minor. She allegedly abused her position of trust with the students. Authorities outlined a wide range of charges involving multiple alleged victims. According to a Facebook post from the sheriff's office, Sheriff Beckett Bro launched an investigation into Noel January 28th after getting a complaint she was having an inappropriate relationship with one of her former students. She was a teacher at Tech Elementary School at the time. Well, back when I was, and this has been, good Lord, 60 years ago, we saw a lot of very young teachers who had what many thought were inappropriate relationships with students. None of them that I know of ever got to the level of charges being filed, but certainly there were suspicions. Well, American travelers have been warned about a popular low-cost beach destination as global tensions rise. U.S. officials issued a travel advisory for a budget-friendly European tourist destination popular for its Adriatic coastline. Tirana, Albania, subject of a travel advisory issued by the U.S. Embassy in Albania April 1st. The embassy, located in Tirana, cited Iran-related tensions as a reason behind the alert. Groups associated with Iran may seek to target entities associated with the U.S. or Iranian opposition elements in Albania, according to the advisory. The embassy warned that the pro-Iranian forces may target crowded venues such as tourist sites and shopping malls and hotels and clubs and restaurants. Well, hopefully there's overreaction. But then again, you never know what the crazies are going to do. Well, Israel-Lebanon ceasefire has been announced by Trump, and that draws praise from world leaders. Joe Rogan, of course, continues to criticize Trump over the war on Iran. He says, why is this still going on? On Thursday, Rogan again criticized the U.S.-Israel war on Iran, describing the military campaign in the Middle East as effing terrifying. He says it's effing terrifying. All of it's terrifying. Anytime you're involved with you shooting missiles into towns and blowing things up, and blowing up infrastructure, blowing up bridges, and Israel's blowing up Lebanon now. That's according to what Rogan told actor David Cross on the Joe Rogan Experience. That's one thing I've yet to understand. While everybody, to include radio hosts, seem to think being an actor makes you an expert in everything in the world. Most of them are doing good to be able to recite the lines they learn from their scripts, much less give us their outlook on the world situation. Well, interesting thing has come to light. And I was doing research for a new book. That'll be our 131st. There's a missing general and a number of scientist deaths tied to secret U.S. work, and it's prompted a White House probe. Susan Wilkerson was gone for just more than an hour when her husband, retired Air Force Major General William Neil McCaslin, who once oversaw some of the military's most advanced and highly classified research programs, vanished from their Albuquerque home. McCaslin, who's 68, left his phone behind, but his wallet and a .38 caliber revolver was missing. That's according to the Bernalillo County, New Mexico Sheriff's Office. General previously had said he was experiencing what he described as a mental fog, according to investigators, but authorities stressed there was no indication he was disoriented at the time of his disappearance. Albuquerque Police Lieutenant Kyle Wood said arguably he would still be the most intelligent person in the room. McCaslin's disappearance is one of 10 recent cases involving scientists tied to U.S. military and government research that have drawn attention, including at the White House, where officials said they're looking into the matter after being asked about a potential pattern. Trump told reporters, I hope it's random, but we're going to know in the next week and a half. I just left a meeting on that subject. Well, here's what we know about the scientists who disappeared or died under a range of circumstances over the past 3 years. We're starting out with McCaslin, disappeared February 27th, 2026. Police have found no trace of him since. His phone, prescription glasses, and wearable devices are found at home. But his hiking boots, his wallet, and a .38 caliber revolver were reported as missing. Senior roles in space research and acquisition, including leadership positions at the Air Force Research Laboratory and the National Reconnaissance Office. His name also came up in an unexpected place years earlier, 2016 WikiLeaks release of emails from Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta. In those messages, musicians and UFO enthusiasts Tom DeLonge described working with McCaslin on discussions related to unidentified aerial phenomena. And let's see. According to Susan Wilkerson, her husband retired in 2013. And when you've been at that level of power and authority for years, as most generals are, retirement becomes quite an issue. Well, let's talk about Monica Jacinto Reza, disappeared June 22nd, 2025. Reza, who's 60, was hiking with a friend in the Angeles National Forest near LA on a well-traveled trail about 9 a.m. in the morning of her disappearance. That's going to the LA County Sheriff's Department. The friend was about 30 feet ahead and told police he turned around to check on her, and she smiled and waved, indicating she's doing fine. So that friend turned back to continue to hike, and when he looked back again, she's gone. That's according to details released during the search. Immediately alerted authorities to send out a search party. Since then, there have been no sightings or any trace of Reza or her belongings. She's an aerospace engineer, was the co-creator of Mondelez, a nickel-based alloy capable of withstanding the extreme heat of rocket engines. At the time of her disappearance, she was the director of materials processing at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Then we got Stephen Garcia, who vanished August 28, 2025. Last seen leaving his home in Albuquerque about 9 in the morning. Captured on surveillance footage of walking away on foot while carrying a handgun. Left behind his phone, his wallet, keys, and car. Hadn't been seen since. He was a government contractor tied to the Kansas City National Security Campus. That's a key facility responsible for producing the vast majority of non-nuclear components used in the U.S. nuclear weapons arsenal. His role reportedly gave him the high-level security clearance and oversight of sensitive assets. Authorities initially warned Garcia may be a danger to himself, raising concerns about his mental state. Carl Grillmeyer, who was killed February 16, 2026, was a California Institute of Technology astrophysicist known for his work on exoplanets and discovery of water on distant worlds. He was shot and killed outside his home in California early in the morning of February 16th. Deputies responding to a call found him on the front porch with a gunshot wound. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities later arrested a 29-year-old suspect in connection with the killing, charging him with murder as well as carjacking and burglary on separate incidents. Investigators said the suspect had previously been reported for trespassing on Grillmeyer's property in the weeks leading up to the shooting. Then we got Nuno Loureiro, died December 15, 2025. Renowned MIT physicist and director of the university's Plasma Science and Fusion Center. Shot at his home in Brookline, Massachusetts, and died for his injuries the next day. His killing came within months of both the disappearance of McCaslin and the fatal shooting of Grillmeyer, adding to growing attention around a series of cases involving scientists tied to defense and aerospace research. And as I said, we're working on a new book on that very topic right now. Well, let's see. There's a number of others, but I'm not going to go through a laundry list. Airport lounge chaos goes viral as kids run wild and passengers ditch basic etiquette. Airport lounges were once the destination of a select few. Recently, the premium spaces are becoming increasingly crowded and chaos is following in some cases. Stories are going viral about passengers raiding complimentary buffets and lounges and children wreaking havoc while distracted parents are unfazed. One airport lounge in a major New York City airport not long ago, witnesses watched in shock as a couple ordered 6 signature burgers and multiple orders of buns. That's according to a view from the Wing blog. Instead of eating the premium patties, the couple stuffed the burgers into a large duffel, added dessert snatched from the buffet. And then to conceal the heist, apparently they stashed the greasy plates behind decorative planters. Lounges have become more crowded, and demographic makeup of U.S. airport lounges has changed, according to Gary Leff, the author of the blog. Once the province of memberships and cheese cubes for solo business travelers, the lounges are increasingly accessed via credit card by premium leisure travelers. He noted during the recent shutdown, U.S. travelers arrived at airports very early, and as a result, many booked passengers were looking for places to relax and, of course, free food. He also said families with children frequent the lounges far more often now. In fact, some lounges have even created kids sections, others haven't. And the kids go crazy and the parents don't do anything about it. Well, peptides may soon be easier to get amid RFK Jr.'s push, but experts are warning about the risk. Food and Drug Administration reportedly way easing restrictions on peptides in anticipated talks. The meeting, which is scheduled to be held in July, is going to discuss relaxing limits on more than half a dozen peptide injections. They're short chains of amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. They play a role in biological functions, according to the National Institute of Health. Peptide drugs are lab-made versions of natural molecules in the body that are designed to mimic or influence biological signals to treat disease, according to experts. In a federal notice released Wednesday, the FDA identified these drugs used for conditions ranging from insomnia to obesity for potential inclusion on a list of substances to be safely compounded by the pharmacies. Well, I even heard a discussion the other day about the fact you can get morphine across the counter. That was something that used to be extremely hard to get. Well, high school students have shown inappropriate images in a teacher's slideshow presentation. Students at a Washington high school were exposed to nude images during a slideshow during a class, the school's president said in a letter to parents. Students at Glacier Peak High School in Sonoma, Washington, were exposed to images of nude breasts during a teacher's presentation. It's according to a letter school principal Alicia Mitchell wrote to parents. It was obtained by Fox News Digital. The letter said families want to make you aware of an incident in the classroom where inappropriate images were inadvertently shared with the students. So understanding these images have since been viewed by many others beyond the classroom and want to give you an opportunity to process with your student if you choose to do so. While the Sonoma School District is investigating, according to the Seattle Red's Jason Rantz, Mitchell's letter to parents offered no details about the teacher. Well, there's all kinds of things that have shown up in slideshows. Some good, some bad, some indifferent. But now, everything is a reason for the teachers to contact the parents. Parents have stood up and demanded their rights as the parents, and that's having a definite impact. Well, Carville telling the Democrats to quietly prepare a power grab with D.C., Puerto Rico statehood, and Supreme Court packing. Veteran Democratic strategist James Carville suggested on Thursday Democrats should quietly prepare to launch a variety of structural changes to ensure a political advantage once they regain power. They've already said once they get back in power, they're going to prosecute a lot of the folks who are in power right now. Carville and co-host Al Hunt of the Politics War Room podcast took questions from listeners on an episode released on Thursday. When asked if the Democrats return to power in 2029, whether they should flood the zone with a correction implementation policy using their majority to simultaneously enact a myriad of structural changes to save our democracy and preserve our rights. I don't know who it is that thinks that the Democrats are in favor of saving democracy. What I've seen so far is they're primarily concerned about what they can put in their pocket. Well, we're going to turn now to our topic for today. And we've been talking about a lot of unsolved mysteries and things like that. Right now, we're going to talk about the Pentagon's secret UFO programs. That's a book we came out with not too long ago. You can find it on Amazon Kindle. Look up Ken Hudnall. For more than 75 years, the subject of unidentified flying objects has occupied a strange place in modern history. On one hand, the phenomena has often been dismissed as fantasy and misidentification or even just imagination. On the other hand, governments, particularly the U.S. government, has quietly spent decades investigating those same reports they publicly minimized. And the contradiction is striking. Military pilots have reported encounters with objects capable of extreme acceleration. Radar operators have tracked aerial targets that appear and disappear in ways that defy conventional aircraft behavior. Intelligence agencies have analyzed photographs and films and sensor data from around the world. But official statements frequently suggested nothing of significance had ever been discovered. The truth, as is often the case in matters of national security, lies somewhere in between. Now, we don't argue that UFOs represent extraterrestrial visitors. Now, we don't also dismiss the phenomena as simply illusion. Instead, this book examines a far more interesting question. While the U.S. military and intelligence community have repeatedly investigated unidentified aerial phenomena for decades, at the same time, saying there's nothing to see here and move on. From the earliest days of the Cold War to modern Pentagon investigations, a consistent pattern has emerged. Whenever unexplained objects appear in military airspace, officials quietly open inquiries to determine what this object might represent. Will they fire in technology, atmospheric phenomena, experimental aircraft, or something else entirely? Well, the purpose of this work is not speculation, but investigation. We're going to examine the programs created to study these reports, the scientists and officers who participated in these investigations, and the conclusions, both public and private, that followed. Some programs were very short-lived. Others lasted for decades. And together they form a hidden history of inquiry into one of the most enduring mysteries of the modern era. Now, the end of the Second World War marked the beginning of one of the most dramatic technological transitions in modern history. Radar had matured into a powerful detection system. Jet aircraft were entering air service. Long-range rockets developed by Germany during the war had demonstrated that objects could travel into the upper atmosphere and beyond. Nations once had been allies quickly became rivals as the Cold War emerged between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The skies are becoming increasingly crowded with experimental aircraft, reconnaissance flights, weather balloons, and advanced military equipment. At the same time, something else began to appear in the skies, objects that other observers couldn't easily identify. But if you check some of the books we've written, those objects have been around long before we decided to look at them. Reports of unusual aerial phenomena began surfacing across the U.S. in the late 1940s. Some witnesses described glowing lights moving silently through the night sky. Others reported the metallic disc or oval-shaped objects traveling at extraordinary speeds. At first, these sightings were sporadic and attracted little attention. But in June of 1947, a single event would transform those scattered reports into an international mystery. That event involved a private pilot by the name of Kenneth Arnold. Now, June 24th, 1947, Arnold was flying his small Call Air A-2 aircraft over the Cascade Mountains in Washington State. Now, he wasn't a novice by any means. He was an experienced aviator and a successful businessman who frequently flew throughout the Pacific Northwest. On that particular afternoon, he had taken to the air partly for business and partly to assist in the search for a missing Marine Corps transport aircraft that reportedly crashed somewhere near Mount Rainier. Weather conditions were ideal for flying. Sky was clear and visibility extended for dozens of miles. Arnold later said he could clearly see Mount Rainier, Mount Adams, and the surrounding peaks as he flew at an altitude of about 9,000 feet. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he noticed a sudden flash of light to the north. At first, he assumed it was sunlight reflecting off another aircraft. But when he looked more carefully, he saw something that puzzled him. Moving across the sky in the distance were 9 unusual objects. The objects were flying in a loose formation, stretching across several miles of sky. He estimated they were traveling roughly along the line between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. Later described the objects as flat and thin, reflecting sunlight as they moved. And what immediately struck him was their unusual motion. Rather than flying smoothly like conventional aircraft, the objects appeared to move with a strange, uneven motion, darting and weaving slightly as they traveled across the horizon. Later compared the movement to a saucer skipping across the water. Well, that description went on to have some unexpected consequences. When Arnold later spoke to reporters, journalists interpreted his comments as referring to the shape of the objects rather than their motion. Newspapers quietly began describing the mysterious craft as flying saucers. The phrase captured the imagination of the public almost immediately. And Arnold observed the objects for about 2 or 3 minutes as they crossed the sky in front of him. And using the distance between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams as a reference point, later attempted to estimate their speed. His calculations suggested the objects were traveling at about 1,200 miles an hour. In 1947, this estimate seemed absolutely astonishing. At the time, even the most advanced military aircraft struggled to reach speeds over 600 miles an hour. Arnold's estimate implied the objects he observed were traveling nearly twice as fast as the fastest known airplanes. After landing in Yakima, Washington, he reported what he had seen. Initially, he spoke with airport personnel and local authorities. But soon afterwards, reporters learned of the sighting, and the story quickly spread. Within days, newspapers across the U.S. were publishing headlines about mysterious flying saucers. Public reaction was immediate. Hundreds of new sightings were reported within weeks. People across the country began scanning the skies, convinced that strange aircraft were flying overhead. Some reports involved bright lights seen at night. Others described metallic discs moving rapidly through the air. Still others reported formations of objects similar to those Arnold had described. Phenomena quickly became a national sensation. Well, the summer of '47 actually became known as the beginning of the flying saucer craze. Newspapers published daily stories describing sightings from across the country. Radio programs discussed the phenomena. Pilots and airline crews reported seeing unusual lights while flying at night. In some cases, witnesses described objects moving at incredible speeds. And others have reported objects hovering silently before suddenly accelerating away. Now, of course, not all reports were credible. Many sightings were eventually explained as misidentified aircraft and weather balloons. That's the government's favorite story, don't you know? Meteors and reflections of sunlight from high-altitude clouds. But the sheer number of reports attracted the attention of military authorities. At the time, the U.S. was deeply concerned about the possibility of advanced Soviet technology. Intelligence officials knew the Soviet Union had captured large quantities of German rocket and aircraft research at the end of the war. The Soviet Union had developed a new type of high-speed aircraft capable of penetrating American airspace, representing a serious threat to national security. Now, the possibility that the sightings represented foreign reconnaissance vehicles couldn't be ignored. The sightings multiplied. U.S. Air Force, or the United States Army Air Force, soon to become the independent United States Air Force, began quietly collecting reports. Pilots were asked to document unusual aerial observations. Radar operators were instructed to report unidentified targets. Intelligence officers compiled witness statements and attempted to determine whether the sightings could be explained by known aircraft or natural phenomena. At first, these investigations were informal. But by the early 1948, the number of reports had grown large enough that the Air Force decided to establish a formal investigative program. That program would become known as Project Sign, the first official U.S. military effort to analyze unidentified flying objects. It began as a single pilot's observation over the mountains of Washington state. It evolved into a mystery that the United States military could no longer ignore, and the investigation was only just beginning. We saw some UFOs in South America. To my knowledge, there was no formal investigation done into them, but there was no doubt in my mind what we were seeing. By the early 1948, the United States military had begun to realize that the wave of strange aerial sightings reported across the country couldn't be just simply ignored. Reports were arriving from pilots, radar operators, military personnel stationed across North America. Some of the witnesses were experienced aviators familiar with aircraft and atmospheric phenomena. While many sightings could be explained away, others remained puzzling. At the time, the U.S. was entering the early years of the Cold War. Relations with the Soviet Union had deteriorated rapidly after the end of the Second World War. Military planners were increasingly concerned about the possibility of advanced Soviet weapons and reconnaissance aircraft. If unknown objects were appearing in American airspace, the military needed to determine what they were, who they belonged to. To address the problem, the U.S. Air Force, newly established as an independent service in 1947, created the first official UFO investigative program. As I said, it was called Project Sign. It was established in January 1948, headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. In fact, Wright-Patterson had become one of the Air Force primary centers for research, intelligence analysis, and aviation development. A small team of intelligence officers, engineers, and scientists was assembled to study reports of unidentified aerial phenomena. The mission of Project Sign was very straightforward. Number one, collect reports of unusual aerial phenomena. Number two, analyze the available data. And number three, determine whether the sightings represented a threat to national security. Investigators gathered reports from a variety of sources, including military bases, airline pilots, civilian witnesses, and radar installations. Each report was evaluated carefully. Witness statements were examined. Flight paths were reconstructed, and investigators attempted to match sightings with known aircraft operations or natural phenomena. Many reports were eventually explained. Weather balloons drifting through the atmosphere frequently appeared as bright discs when illuminated by sunlight. Astronomical objects such as Venus was sometimes mistaken for hovering aircraft. High-altitude aircraft could produce unusual reflections when seen from certain angles. But there were certain sightings that proved far more difficult to explain. One of the most dramatic early cases investigated by Project Sign occurred in January 1948. It involved a tragic aviation accident. It was January the 7th. Radar operators and ground observers near Fort Knox, Kentucky, saw a large unidentified object high over the sky. Several witnesses described the object as bright metallic. Others reported that it appeared enormous and motionless at a high altitude. 4 F-51 Mustang fighter aircraft from the Kentucky Air National Guard were dispatched to investigate. The flight leader was Captain Thomas Mantell, an experienced pilot and decorated World War II veteran. As Mantell and his wingman climbed toward the object, they reported seeing something large and bright above them. Mantell continued climbing in pursuit while the other aircraft eventually turned back due to fuel limitations. Mantell's aircraft continued ascending to extreme altitude. At about 25,000 feet, Mantell lost consciousness due to lack of oxygen, at least that is the story. His aircraft entered a steep descent and crashed near Frankton, Kentucky. Mantell, of course, was killed instantly. The incident became one of the first widely publicized UFO-related aviation tragedies. Investigators later concluded Mantell had likely been chasing a skyhook balloon, type of high-altitude research balloon used by the Navy for atmospheric studies. Now, of course, they never came up with the identity of whoever put that aircraft in the sky, but any way to explain it gave the government what it was looking for. But the case did attract enormous public attention and intensified interest in the UFO phenomena. Project Sign investigators, the Mantell incident demonstrated UFO sightings could have serious consequences. The pilots attempted to intercept unknown objects without adequate information. Well, as Project Sign continued its investigation, analysts began noticing patterns in the reports they collected. Many witnesses described objects that appeared disc-shaped or oval. Others reported cigar-shaped aircraft or formations of bright lights moving together across the sky. Several sightings involved objects performing unusual maneuvers. Witnesses described objects accelerating rapidly, changing direction abruptly, or becoming motionless before suddenly departing at high speed. In some cases, radar operators reported tracking unidentified targets and moving at extraordinary speeds. And these reports raised important questions for investigators. Were the sightings a result of misidentification? Did they represent new atmospheric phenomena not yet understood by scientists? Or did they indicate the existence of advanced aircraft developed by a foreign power? At the time, the possibility of Soviet technological breakthroughs couldn't be dismissed. Soviet Union had gained access to German scientists and engineers after the war, including experts who had worked on advanced rocket and aircraft projects. American intelligence officials worried that the Soviet Union might be developing a high-speed reconnaissance aircraft capable of penetrating U.S. airspace. And also at the time, there were stories circulating that the Nazis had actually discovered a crashed UFO and had reverse engineered it to create their own UFOs. Now, those stories are still circulating today, but they've never been proven or disproven. Now, as the investigation progressed, some members of Project Sign team began considering a far more controversial possibility. Classified analysis prepared by investigators reportedly examined whether the UFO sightings might represent technology not originating on Earth. This analysis became known as the estimate of the situation. According to the later accounts, the report concluded that the extraterrestrial hypothesis might offer the best explanation for some of the unexplained sightings. Well, that document was sent to General Hoyt Vandenberg, Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. He reportedly rejected the conclusions out of hand, stating the available evidence was insufficient to support such an extraordinary claim. The report was subsequently dismissed, and according to some accounts, all the copies of the estimate of the situation were destroyed. This is one of the many cases when one man's opinion directed which way research was going to go. And whether the estimate of the situation truly concluded that an extraterrestrial craft was responsible for some sightings remains a subject of debate among historians. What is clear is that the report marked a turning point in the military's approach to UFO investigations. By late 1948, disagreements had begun to emerge within the Air Force regarding how UFO sightings should be interpreted. Some investigators believed the phenomena deserved a continued serious study. Others argued that most sightings could be explained through conventional means and that the subject was attracting unnecessary public attention. In 1949, the Air Force reorganized the investigation and replaced Project Sign with a new program. This new program is known as Project Grudge. And while Project Sign had approached UFO sightings with an open mind, tempered with a cautious curiosity, Project Grudge would adopt a far more skeptical stance. The military's first official investigation into unidentified flying objects had come to an end. But the mystery was far from resolved. The reports of strange objects in the sky continued to arrive from across the United States. And the Air Force soon found itself facing the same question that led to the creation of Project Sign in the first place. What exactly were people seeing in the skies above America? By early 1949, the United States Air Force found itself in an uncomfortable position regarding the growing number of UFO reports. Project Sign had collected hundreds of sightings and analyzed them with a degree of scientific curiosity. But the conclusions drawn by some investigators, particularly the controversial estimate of the situation, had caused concern among senior military leadership. Air Force officials feared that speculation about extraordinary extraterrestrial craft could damage the credibility of the military and potentially cause unnecessary public alarm. Cold War was intensifying, and defense officials already dealing with growing concerns about the Soviet military capabilities. And in addition to that, let's not forget, July 1947, the Roswell crash, where supposedly a UFO was found scattered across the debris field, along with some bodies, I might add. Well, the Air Force decided to reorganize the UFO investigation. So Project Sign was replaced by a new program known as Project Grudge. When Project Sign approached the UFO reports with an open mind, Grudge adopted, as I said, a more skeptical and controlled approach. I've had some people who worked on it said they were told to discount sightings, no matter how outlandish explanation might be. Come up with an explanation for every sighting. Well, the primary goal of the Project Grudge wasn't simply to investigate UFO sightings, but to reduce public interest in the phenomena. Air Force officials are increasingly concerned about the psychological effects of widespread UFO reports. Newspapers are filled with stories about mysterious flying discs, and the public fascination with the subject is growing rapidly. Military leaders were worried that the phenomena could create unnecessary fear or even be exploited by foreign propaganda. Investigators working under Project Grudge were encouraged to find the conventional explanations whenever possible. As a result, many reports are attributed to weather balloons. That's their favorite default position. Astronomical objects, aircraft seen from unusual angles, hoaxes or misidentification. Psychological explanations are also becoming more prominent. Some analysts argue that UFO sightings were the result of mass hysteria, fueled by media coverage and science fiction stories that have become popular in magazines and radio programs. Others believe that many witnesses simply misinterpreted the ordinary objects because they were already primed to expect something unusual. Despite the skeptical approach of Project Grudge, investigators still encountered cases that were difficult to explain. Reports continued to arrive from experienced pilots and trained observers who described objects performing unusual maneuvers. Some witnesses reported objects accelerating rapidly or changing direction abruptly. Others described craft that appeared to hover silently before suddenly streaking away. Radar operators occasionally detected unidentified targets moving across their screens in ways that didn't correspond to known aircraft. And while many of these reports could eventually be explained, a small number remain unresolved. Even skeptical investigators had to acknowledge that the available information was sometimes insufficient to determine what had actually been observed. One of the central concerns of Project Grudge was the growing influence of the UFO phenomenon on public perception. By the late 40s, flying saucers had become a cultural sensation. Newspapers regularly printed stories about mysterious sightings. Radio broadcasts discussed the possibility of visitors from outer space. Science fiction writers eagerly incorporated the idea of alien spacecraft into their stories. And the Air Force worried that continued attention to UFO reports might encourage additional sightings or even hoaxes. Project Grudge, therefore, adopted a strategy of minimizing the significance of the phenomena. Official statements emphasized that most sightings can be explained by conventional causes, and there was no evidence of extraterrestrial technology. While this approach reduced some public concern, it also created criticism from individuals who believed the Air Force was diminishing legitimate observations too quickly. During the 1950s, it had become clear that the UFO phenomena was not disappearing. Reports continued to arrive from across the U.S. and around the world. Some of the sightings involved the military pilots and radar installations, which made them difficult to dismiss entirely. And then in 1952, a series of dramatic sightings of Washington, D.C. took place, and it forced the Air Force to reconsider its approach. The results would be the creation of the most famous UFO investigation program in American history. That program became known as Project Blue Book, which, in my humble opinion, was a publicity stunt to make them go away. In 1952, the U.S. Air Force launched a new investigation into unidentified flying objects that would become one of the most widely known government programs associated with the UFO phenomena. As I said, that program was called Project Blue Book. Headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Blue Book was designed to collect, analyze, and evaluate reports of UFO sightings while determining whether any of these objects represented a threat to national security. Unlike Project Grudge, which had emphasized skepticism and public reassurance, Project Blue Book attempted to combine investigation with scientific analysis. Over the next 17 years, the program had examined more than 12,000 reported sightings. One of the earliest events that helped trigger the creation of Project Blue Book occurred in July of '52, as I said earlier, followed a series of strange radar contacts over the nation's capital. Radar operators at Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base began detecting unidentified targets moving through the skies over Washington, D.C. Radar returns appeared suddenly and moved in unusual patterns. Air traffic controllers watched as the objects changed direction abruptly and traveled at speeds far beyond those of conventional aircraft. When fighter jets were scrambled to investigate, the radar targets reportedly vanished. Once the jets left the area, the objects reappeared. The incidents occurred over 2 consecutive weekends and attracted enormous attention from both the media and the public. Newspapers reported that mysterious objects had been detected flying over the capital of the United States, which, of course, meant the Air Force had to do something. They quickly held a press conference to reassure the public that the sightings likely involved temperature inversions, atmospheric conditions capable of producing unusual radar reflections. And while some scientists accepted this explanation, others remained skeptical. Regardless of the cause, the Washington incidents demonstrated that UFO sightings could generate national headlines and put pressure on the military to provide answers. Project Blue Book investigators reviewed thousands of reports submitted by pilots and military personnel and civilians, and each report was analyzed using a standard process. Investigators initially attempted to determine the location and time of the sighting, weather conditions, possible aircraft activity in the area, astronomical objects visible at the time, and as a result, many cases were eventually explained as misidentified aircraft, weather balloons, meteors, or planets. But not all reports could be resolved. Even after careful analysis, hundreds of cases remained officially classified as unidentified. These cases often lack sufficient data to determine what had actually been observed. Some involved witnesses who reported unusual shapes or flight characteristics. Others included radar contacts that didn't match known aircraft patterns. And while Project Blue Book investigators didn't conclude that extraterrestrial craft were responsible, they did acknowledge that some sightings couldn't be fully explained. Several cases investigated by Project Blue Book became widely known among UFO researchers. One of those was the so-called Socorro incident in 1964. Police officer Lonnie Zamora reported seeing an unusual object on the ground near Socorro, New Mexico. Zamora described an egg-shaped craft supported by landing legs. 2 small figures appeared to be standing near the object before it suddenly lifted off and flew away. Investigators examined the landing site and reported finding burned vegetation and impressions in the soil. And although several explanations were proposed, the case remained one of the more puzzling incidents investigated by Blue Book. Another famous case involved the Lubbock lights, observed by numerous witnesses in Texas during the early 1950s. Witnesses reported seeing large formations of lights flying silently across the night sky. While some investigators believe the lights might have been birds reflecting city lights, the sightings were never fully resolved. By the end of the 1960s, the Air Force faced increasing pressure from scientists and government officials to determine whether UFO investigation should continue. To address the issue, the Air Force commissioned a study conducted by the University of Colorado. The study became known as the Condon Report. Conclusion of that report will ultimately bring Project Blue Book to an end. You have to remember, the goal of most of these investigations and reports from that time period was to make everybody believe that they just imagined the whole thing. In 1966, the U.S. Air Force sought an independent scientific evaluation of the UFO phenomena. Task was assigned to a research team at the University of Colorado led by physicist Dr. Edward Condon, respected scientist, former director of the National Bureau of Standards. The goal of this study was to determine whether UFO sightings represented a scientific mystery worthy of continued investigation. And over the course of 2 years, the Colorado research team examined dozens of UFO cases drawn from the Project Blue Book files. Investigators interviewed witnesses, analyzed photographs, and reviewed their data. The final report, released in 1969, concluded a further scientific study of UFOs was unlikely to produce significant discoveries. In other words, they did as they were paid to do. They tried to make the topic go away. According to the report, most sightings can be explained by conventional causes such as aircraft and balloons, atmospheric objects, astronomical phenomena. The report also stated UFO sightings didn't appear to represent a threat to national security. Well, despite its conclusions, the Condon report quickly became controversial. Some scientists who reviewed the report noted that several of the case studies included within the document described as sightings that investigators could not explain. Critics argued that while the report's conclusions dismissed the UFO phenomena, the evidence presented within the report didn't fully support that conclusion. Some members of the research team reportedly expressed concerns that the study had been biased from the beginning. Nevertheless, the Air Force accepted the report's recommendations. December 1969, the United States Air Force officially terminated Project Blue Book. In announcing that decision, the Air Force stated no UFO reported to the Air Force had been ever confirmed as extraterrestrial. No evidence indicated UFOs represented advanced technology beyond human capabilities, and continued investigation of UFO sightings was unlikely to produce scientific breakthroughs. For the public, the message was clear. The military concluded that the UFO phenomena didn't warrant further study. But while the official investigation had ended, sightings and unidentified aerial phenomena did not stop, in spite of rumors to the contrary. In the decades that followed, reports would continue to emerge from pilots and radar operators and military personnel. And eventually, the Pentagon would once again find itself studying the mystery of objects in the sky that defied easy explanation. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back on Monday because today is Friday. We'll be back on Monday and we're going to talk about more of the Pentagon's secret UFO programs. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great weekend.